Thanks very much, Iraj, for joining us. The country needs a serious uplift in economic growth to improve the country's fortunes. What are your views around the whole story in terms of the structural reforms that we've been promised, the spectrum, the energy, renewable energy, and so on and so forth? It seems as though we're behind the curve. And are we going to get yet more announcements about structural reforms tonight?
Look, thank you very much for inviting me, and greetings to our viewers. The fact is that the economy desperately needs a set of actions, not promises. On many fronts, the solutions are known. The National Treasury, a few years back, has already put in a sort of set of policies that need immediate attention. Since then, more issues have come up. For example, one of the obstacles to our economic growth at the moment, our export, is the state of our ports. Transnet and the port managements are completely out of kilter with what the economy needs. Nobody seems to do anything about it. Everybody, including the ministers and the presidents, they have become analysts. They have become observers of what needs to be done, as opposed to executive authority that needs to get things done. So one hopes that after a few years of delivering a few SONAs, the president today or this evening would deliver a set of time-bound interventions that will release the economy from the shackles that have been created around it. There is no point in having further promises, because it further undermines the credibility of the president and his cabinet.
So what about timelines for one of the biggest, or if not the biggest, elephant in the South African economy, or the South African room, which is, of course, is Eskom. Eskom has debt to the tune of just below 400 billion rand. It doesn't always provide electricity when we want it to. And if all goes well in its favor, then they're going to be raising the prices of electricity when we do actually get to consume it, which is proving to be quite unaffordable, not only for households, but for businesses as well. What sort of timelines need to be put around Eskom, and in order for us as South Africa to sustainably manage the electricity prices, which are getting out of hand? We've already heard in other countries in the world that governments are actually giving taxpayers money or ratepayers money in order for them to be able to afford their bills.
Absolutely. I think with respect, I would like to suggest that instead of putting timeline for Eskom, Eskom is in deep trouble and will remain in trouble for the next 10 years. No matter who is in charge and no matter who says what, because Eskom is a last century organization, not future organization. It's got financial problem, it's got generation problem, it's got consistency problem, it's got technical problems, and. What we need to focus on and put timeline on is the national energy solution. Bring in whoever provides the solution, incentivize businesses and households to go to alternative energy as soon as possible, because that is a much cheaper way to solve the problem than try to pump more and more money, scarce fiscal resources, into fixing Eskom. Everybody knows it, everybody talks about it, but somehow the cabinet just ignores the reality. So I think we need to separate Eskom problem from South Africa's energy requirements. And energy requirements, you can start within 6 to 12 months if you put the appropriate policies in place at much cheaper rate than subsidizing Eskom. We can solve almost all of our energy problems.
But hasn't that happened already? We've heard about, requests for proposals and so on and so forth. Is that process moving timelessly, do you think, or are there delays that could be avoided?
I think that is one part of the solution. That cannot be the solution. That is part of a jigsaw puzzle. Yes, the Ministry of Energy deals with different windows, as they call them, for alternative energy. But at the same time, if you look at countries like Italy, like Germany, like all successful countries, they start providing incentive for businesses and households to go get off the grid, go into alternative energy, And that is a much cheaper way. That is not a substitute for what the government is doing, but that's another prong or another channel of dealing with the national energy problem, which unless we solve, the economy will be hamstrung. So we need to learn from other countries that have tested and tried, and successful solutions have been part, and not just rely on one solution. Alternative energy by instead of ESCOM, somebody else is relying on yet another organization. We need to diversify our channels of solving the energy problem as opposed to relying on one or two. And in that way, the cost is cheaper, the solution is quicker, and the economy can get going. But that's just one area. But equally, alongside energy, the operations of our logistics. Our ports are in absolute mess, and they are not coping with the volume of our export, especially fruit export. That is going to cost us millions and billions if we don't deal with it. And this, again, similar type of thing. The ministers and the team, they talk about the problem, they do nothing about it, and the economy suffers, jobs are lost, and competitive to the economy is lost.
Yeah, we have to discuss this one last point. Earlier, we did speak to a development economist, and ultimately she was talking about the importance of having some sort of basic income grant, which is, of course, everybody's talking about, but ultimately saying that for the long term, we really need more investment in the productive sectors of our economy, which in the long run should boost jobs and participation in the economy and so on and so forth. In your view, what quantum can government afford if indeed it were to institute a basic income grant? And what sort of timeline do you think that it would be manageable for us to have something like that? Because we already have some 18, 19 million people already on permanent social security support.
Absolutely. Basic income grant is something that we cannot afford not to do it. And because of that, we have to do it properly. Basic income grant at whatever level we put, 350, 550, 1,000 Rand, whatever level we choose, it doesn't matter. It can only be sustained if it's financed by medium to long-term tax revenues. Other than that, we really short-selling the poor and politicking around poverty, which is absolutely inhumane, given the level of poverty and unemployment that we have. Therefore, the government has to solve the problem of two problems immediately. One is, how do we get the tax base on a sustainable basis such that it can underpin basic income grant? The second one, as importantly, how do we do away with wasteful expenditure, including the ministers' packages and their support, and billions that are wasted? And I'm not referring to the corruption. I'm not referring to wasteful expenditure. I'm referring to wages and salaries of the cabinet, their support advisors, the mayors, the premiers, and it goes on and on, for doing very little by way of leading, by way of creating an environment that is conducive to growth. So we need to manage the expenditure side of the economy as well as the revenue side, so that we can afford a basic income grant that is sustainable and is humane.
Thank you very much, Dr. Iraj Abedian. He's the Chief Executive of Pan-African Investment and Research Services.